My in-laws wanted absurd prenup agreement. Now want me to break it. I always thought that stories about controlling in-laws were exaggerations, something you only see in TV series or forums to entertain us for a while. Then I met Julia's parents and I understood. No, there are people who live to complicate your life. But let's start from the beginning. I met Julia 6 years ago at a networking event. She had just launched her small business more out of passion than any expectation of success. She was working on it. From the beginning, we connected with each other. She was intelligent, funny, and beautiful. Everything in one perfect package. Our relationship progressed quickly, and after 2 years together, I decided to propose to her. Everything seemed to be going well until the dinner when we announced our engagement to her parents. They had always treated me with superficial kindness, the kind of courtesy you know is closer to duty than genuine affection. But that night was different. Their faces went from surprise to a kind of poorly disguised discomfort. That's when it all started. Comments like, "Are you sure you want to get married so young, Julia? Marriage is a big commitment. Have you considered all the implications?" What they really were saying, although they didn't say it openly that night, was that I wasn't good enough for their daughter. They came from an upper-class family. Well, not exactly. My parents were humble workers, and my business was just starting at that time, but I thought that over time, I would earn a place in their hearts. Shortly after, Julia called me. She was crying to tell me that her parents had said they didn't approve of our marriage, at least not without a prenuptial agreement. According to them, the prenup was to protect her because you never know what can happen in the future. To be honest, it hurt at first. I felt strongly that they were questioning my love for their daughter, as if all I wanted was their money, which was absurd because Julia didn't have much wealth of her own. She lived in an apartment paid for by her parents. But after thinking about it and talking with Julia, I agreed to sign, thinking I could show them that I was with her for the right reasons and not out of self-interest. The agreement was frankly ridiculous. It stipulated that everything Julia owned before and after the marriage would be exclusively hers, and I would have no right to claim absolutely anything in case of divorce. On my part, everything I had before or would achieve afterwards would also be mine. But at that moment, I barely had anything. At first, they thought it was a fair agreement. I don't know if it was pride, love, or naivety. I signed without hesitation. Julia was grateful and told me that this would only prove to her parents that I was the right man for her. During the first years of our marriage, everything went well. Julia decided to stop working and focus on the house because, according to her, she wanted to enjoy the marriage without stress. This didn't bother me. The business was starting to grow, and I saw no problem covering the expenses. I like to think we were a team. What nobody predicted, not even me, was the resounding success of my business. I started selling products online, beginning in my apartment, but within a few years, the company became nationally recognized. I opened offices, hired employees, and when we completed 5 years in business, I was making more money than I ever would have imagined. On the other hand, Julia still wasn't working. This didn't bother me because she was my wife, and it was never about who contributed more. But what started to bother me was how her parents, who had never been interested in my business before, suddenly started meddling. If you're thinking, I see where this is going, trust me, you don't. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me, would you sign that prenup? Let's see what you all think. Suddenly, their visits to our house became constant. And although at first their comments seemed casual, they soon became embarrassing. As you become more and more successful, you should think about securing Julia's future, don't you think? It's fair that she also has access to all of this. After all, she's your wife. Inside, I wanted to scream at them that I was already securing Julia's future. Everything I had was meant to be hers, without the need for documents or contracts. But for them, it wasn't like that. The irony of all this is that, thanks to the prenuptial agreement that they themselves insisted we sign, Julia had no right to anything I had achieved after we got married. That detail didn't seem to bother them when they thought I would be a failure. But now that the situation was different, things had changed. They started to alter the narrative. When I signed the prenuptial agreement, I thought it would mean the end of any financial discussion with Julia's parents. I never imagined that years later, the same document would become the center of so much tension. To contextualize further, since my business took off, our lives changed drastically. We went from living in a small rented apartment to buying a beautiful house in an exclusive area with a pool, gym, and even a studio, so Julia would have her personal space. I didn't mind spending money on amenities, as I felt that everything I earned was also for her. At first, her parents seemed delighted. I was no longer the humble boy who didn't deserve their daughter. Now, I was the successful husband who proudly showed off the house in new cars whenever they came to visit. But as expected, that attitude only lasted until they started questioning certain things. It all started at a family dinner at our house. We had prepared a special meal to celebrate Julia's birthday, and at a certain point in the night, her mother let slip a seemingly harmless comment. But it's incredible what you've accomplished together. I'm sure Julia has a lot to do with your success. I wasn't clueless. No, because I would have liked to thank Julia. I always believed my success was also hers. But since the question had a certain insinuating tone, as if she wanted to say something more, I responded in the most diplomatic way possible. Well, she's always supported me emotionally, and that means a lot. I thought that would be enough, but no. Her mother continued. Of course. But if it weren't for the stability she provided you, do you think you would have come this far? The comment made me deeply uncomfortable because, although Julia had been great emotional support at the beginning, she had been uninvolved in my business or our finances for years. I was the one who worked 12-hour days, making important decisions and taking all the risks. I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and changed the subject. During dinner, I noticed a change in her parents. Visits to our house became more frequent, and passive-aggressive comments began to emerge. It's good that Julia found someone with vision for the future. She'll never have to worry. I wish there were more men like that who understand that money isn't just theirs, but the family's. The worst was yet to come. A few weeks later, Julia told me that her mother wanted to speak with me privately. I was surprised, but agreed. What followed was the most absurd conversation I've ever had in my life. Her mother started in an almost sweet tone, as if she were worried about me. "We know you're a hard-working and successful man, and we're very proud of everything you've achieved. But we're also worried about Julia's lack of protection." The word protected sounded strange to me, so I asked her to clarify her response. She left me speechless. Well, according to the prenuptial agreement, technically she doesn't have access to what you've earned. Although I'm sure nothing will ever happen between you two, it would be good to reconsider the clauses so that everything is more balanced. Then I understood everything. They weren't worried about Julia. Money was the concern. The very agreement they forced me to sign was now the problem, because it meant I had absolute control over our finances, although inside I was furious. I responded calmly. "I understand what you're saying, but that agreement was your idea, wasn't it? And I think Julia and I are fine this way. I don't see any need to change it." Her smile disappeared immediately, and her tone changed from friendly to condescending. "This has nothing to do with you, dear. It's about Julia's place. After so much sacrifice for this marriage, it's the least you can do." Sacrificed. That word haunted me for days. What had Julia sacrificed? She had chosen not to work. She had chosen to depend on me financially, something I never criticized her for. But now, according to her parents, she deserves something better because she was my wife. When I told Julia what had happened, she told me she hoped I would be on her side. At first, she assured me she didn't want to alter the agreement and that her parents were just being protective. But over time, I noticed something. Every time her parents visited or they were talking on the phone, she seemed more distant, colder towards me. That night, after returning from visiting her mother, she asked me casually, "Do you think my mother is right? I mean, wouldn't it be easier if we didn't have that agreement?" Update 2. Losing control. I don't know if you've ever felt like you're losing control of your own life, like someone else is pulling the strings behind everything. That's exactly how I felt during the months that followed that first conversation with my mother-in-law. Julia started mentioning the prenuptial agreement more frequently, always in a casual tone, as if she were testing the waters. At first, I tried not to give it much importance. I told myself it was just something passing, something that would disappear if I ignored it. But it didn't. Then one night, after dinner, Julia sat down with me in the living room and said she wanted to have a serious conversation. I got a bad feeling. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about regarding the prenuptial agreement," she began. I already knew where this was going, but I let her continue. "I think when we signed the contract, things were different. Back then, you didn't have the success you have now, and I didn't know how much this would change our lives. But now I feel like that agreement doesn't represent who we are as a couple. I'm not going to lie, those words hurt me. What exactly did that mean? That our relationship was defined by a piece of paper?" I tried to stay calm and asked her, "What exactly do you want to change, Julia?" She hesitated a bit, finally said, "I just want it to be fairer, something that reflects that we're a team, because we are, right?" At that moment, I couldn't contain everything I had been repressing. A team? Suddenly? Since when do you care about this, Julia? I was the one who worked day and night to get here. You decided to quit your job because you wanted to enjoy married life. I never criticized you for that. But now I discover that all this time, I was the one who made the sacrifices, not you. She stayed silent, as if she didn't expect me to react that way. And then she said something that completely devastated me. "Does this mean you don't value what I did for you?" I wanted to scream at her that no, she didn't value any of it. The constant pressure from her parents, the passive-aggressive comments, and the fact that she never tried to defend me from them. But instead, I just told her I wasn't going to change the agreement. Less than a week later, Julia organized a family meeting at home with her parents. I found out they were coming just a few hours before, when Julia casually mentioned she wanted all of us to talk about our future. The meeting was a disaster from the beginning. Her mother wasted no time and delivered the first punch. "I don't understand why you refuse to do something so simple, dear. Julia just wants what's better for both of you." I tried to maintain my composure, but her condescending tone was pushing me away. I explained to them once again that I saw no need to change the prenuptial agreement because our lives didn't depend on it. Julia already had access to everything she needed, and I would always ensure her well-being. Her father intervened with that authoritarian air he had always detested. A man who doesn't protect his family is not a man. It's not just about money, but about principles. Or is there something you're hiding? That last sentence was the last straw. I stood up from the table and told them I wouldn't tolerate any more accusations. I reminded them that they themselves had insisted on that agreement, and now, purely out of convenience, they wanted to change it. "If you think I'm going to give in to your manipulations, you're wasting your time," I said. Julia looked at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. I realized I was alone with them, but I was no longer on the same side as her. After that night, things at home became tense. Julia stopped talking to me for days, and when she did speak, it was was only to discuss the relationship we had built over the years. Everything seemed to crumble before my eyes. I came home from work one day and found a note on the dining room table. Julia had gone to her parents' house to reflect. Actually, it didn't surprise me. Part of me felt relief, but I also knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Update 3. The legal battle begins. After Julia went to her parents' house, there was an awkward silence in my life. I didn't know if I should feel betrayed, angry, or simply resigned. Deep down, I hoped that this time for reflection would be a way for her to calm down and see things clearly, but I soon discovered that the time she needed was actually to plan her next move with her parents. A week after Julia left, she called me asking to meet in a neutral cafe. Her tone was almost cold, professional. I already knew this conversation wasn't going to be good, but I still went because part of me wanted to fix things, even though I wasn't sure if anything could be recovered. When I arrived, Julia was already there waiting for me with a folder on the table. It didn't take me long to deduce what it was about. She didn't waste time beating around the bush. I've been thinking a lot about us. I think the best thing is to resolve this once and for all. Here are the modifications to the prenuptial agreement that I believe are fair for both of us. She handed me the folder, and when I opened it, I could barely believe what I was reading. Basically, the document stated that the original agreement would be nullified and that all properties, income, and assets acquired during the marriage would be divided 50-50. In short, she wanted half of everything I had built. Try to stay calm as I asked her, "Is this what you want?" Julia seemed offended by the question. "This is what I think is fair. They have nothing to do with it. I'm thinking about our future." It was obvious she was lying. I could hear her mother's voice in each of those words. So I returned the folder and said I wasn't going to sign anything. If this is the future you want, then there's nothing more to say. You can choose to keep the original agreement as it is or end this conversation. It ended with Julia storming out of the cafe furiously. But that was just the beginning. A few days later, I started receiving emails and messages from different numbers. Unknown people were spreading rumors about me, saying I was manipulating Julia and that my success was thanks to her sacrifices. It was evident they belonged to a close circle, probably influenced by her parents. What bothered me most was that they were trying to damage my professional reputation by sending these messages to some of my clients. The hardest blow came when a former colleague sent me a screenshot of a social media post written by Julia's mother. It said something like, "It's sad to see how some people forget who was by their side when they had nothing. My daughter deserves much more respect and recognition for everything she did for her husband. Family should always come first, but it seems some men only think of themselves." Although she didn't mention my name directly, it was clear she was talking about me. The post went viral in her social circle, and soon embarrassing questions and comments started emerging from acquaintances and friends. That's when I decided to hire a lawyer. I didn't want the situation to reach this point, but it became clear I couldn't sit idly by while they tried to destroy me. I explained the situation to him, and he gave me simple but firm advice. Don't give an inch. If they want to play dirty, we'll play smarter. The first thing we did was reinforce the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Fortunately, it was impeccable from a legal standpoint, and there was no way to cancel it without my consent. We also started gathering evidence of the defamation attempts by her family, which could become a lawsuit if they continued. Meanwhile, Julia kept sending me contradictory messages. One day, she said she loved me and wanted to fix things, and the next she accused me of being selfish for not giving a little. It was as if she were trapped between her own desires and her parents' pressure. Finally, a few months ago, I received a formal letter from a lawyer hired by Julia. They asked me for a meeting to renegotiate the terms of the agreement and threatened to take the case to court if I didn't agree. This was ridiculous because the agreement was absolutely solid. What infuriated me most was that the letter insinuated that Julia had significantly contributed to the success of my business, something we both knew wasn't true. At that point, I stopped trying to understand or negotiate and decided that if they wanted war, they would have war. My lawyer and I started preparing a strategy not only to defend myself, but also to expose all the lies and manipulations of her family. Update 4. When I received the letter from Julia's lawyers, I assumed it would be their most aggressive action to date, but that was just the beginning of the attack. Julia and her parents were determined to break me. After ignoring my initial refusal, her parents took a measure that, frankly, seemed designed to intimidate me. They filed a lawsuit against me claiming that Julia was entitled to fair compensation for the significant impact she had on my business and our finances. This was surprising since the prenuptial agreement had already been validated and there was no way to break it without my consent. However, I quickly understood what their tactic was. They weren't interested in winning the case, but in wearing me down emotionally and financially through legal proceedings. Their plan was simple: suffocate me until I had no choice but to give in. My lawyer reassured me, saying their accusations were absurd and they had no evidence to support their case. But I was already tired. My patience had reached its limit and I was determined to retaliate. The blow came during the preparation of my defense when something interesting surfaced. My lawyer and his team began investigating the financial situation of Julia and her parents to neutralize their accusations, and they discovered something that left me speechless. Julia's parents' family business, which had once been a source of pride, was in serious financial trouble. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, had debts with banks and suppliers, and apparently had been using the image of their perfect family to keep up appearances. This explained a lot. Her mother's constant constant comments about protecting Julia and their desperate attempts to access my money weren't out of love or concern, but because they were sinking financially. But it wasn't just their problem. The financial documents my lawyer reviewed revealed something even more interesting. My in-laws had been trying to transfer properties to Julia's name a few months before she asked me to revise the prenuptial agreement. Basically, they were paving the way to use her as an intermediary to protect their assets for possible seizures. At that moment, everything made sense. Julia wasn't the mastermind behind this situation. Her parents were using her to save themselves. I felt betrayed again, but this time with a mixture of pity for Julia, although that didn't mean I would forgive anything. With this new information in hand, my lawyer proposed a plan to counterattack with a lawsuit for defamation and moral damages, using the evidence, social media posts, and rumors that spread about me to publicly expose them. The financial situation of her parents was necessary to delegitimize the accusations that I was the selfish manipulator in the relationship. Evidence of attempts to transfer property to prove that all of this was a financial game orchestrated by her family. While all this was being prepared, Julia tried to approach me again. One day, she showed up at the house unannounced, crying and saying she didn't want things to get to this point, and that she just wanted us to go back to how things were before. Part of me wanted to believe her, but her previous attitude and her parents' influence didn't allow me to trust her. I responded honestly, "Julia, I don't know if that's how you really feel, or if it's just another strategy from your parents, but I can't. If you really want to fix things, you need to stop living like this. Show them you're on my side, otherwise this ends here." She said nothing. She simply left crying. I didn't know if her tears were genuine or part of the show, but it didn't matter anymore. I was determined to protect myself at all costs. Shortly after, her parents tried as a last desperate resort. They sent a friendly settlement proposal to avoid trial. Basically, they wanted me to give them a considerable amount of money in exchange for withdrawing the lawsuit. It was ridiculous that they thought I would give in after everything they had done. It couldn't have been more wrong. I responded through my lawyer that I not only rejected their proposal, but would also proceed with my lawsuit. Their silence after that was deafening. Now, with the trial about to start, everything was about to explode, and I was ready to face whatever came. Update 5. Well, here we are. The storm finally passed, and the disaster that Julia and her parents left was much bigger than they imagined. But you know what? For the first time in a long time, I feel free. Although the path to get here was not easy at all, the trial was exactly the circus Julia's parents expected. They arrived with an air of superiority, as if they were sure their strategy would work. Julia, on the other hand, looked completely out of place, almost as if she didn't want to be there. I suppose even she realized they had crossed a line from which there was no return. My lawyer did impeccable work during the first part of the hearing. He dismantled each of the accusations against me, pointing out how the evidence they presented was vague and unfounded. But the real gem came when we presented our rebuttal. First, we exposed the social media posts and messages I received, showing how they tried to defame me, to pressure me emotionally and socially. We brought to light the financial problems of Julia's parents, including their attempts to transfer properties to her name. The judge was not impressed. In fact, he seemed visibly irritated with them. But the final blow came when we presented an email that Julia had sent to her mother months before, where she asked me to renegotiate the prenuptial agreement. In it, Julia said something like, "I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. I know he never let me lack anything, but I understand we need to protect ourselves. I'll do what you ask, but I feel terrible." That email was devastating for them. It showed not only that everything was a plan by her parents, but also that Julia wasn't acting independently. They tried to argue that the email was taken out of context, but by then it was too late. The judge completely rejected their claim and decided in my favor on the counterclaim. They not only had to bear all the costs, they were also ordered to pay legal fees and compensation for defamation. It was a decisive victory. After the trial, things quickly fell apart for them. The public exposure of their financial problems was a blow from which they couldn't recover. Their company ended up closing, and their assets were seized to pay their debts. Ironically, the same family that once despised me for not being good enough ended up ruined while I continued prospering. Julia tried to contact me after the trial. She sent me a long message apologizing and saying she had been manipulated by her parents. She said she still loved me and wanted to try again, but I didn't respond. For me, it was over. I sold the house where we lived together and moved to another city, far away from everything that reminded me of that phase of my life. As for Julia and her family, I don't want to give them even a little bit more of me. The best part was the energy I used. I used part of the compensation I received to make a donation to a local charity that supports young entrepreneurs. If there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that in the end it's not just about winning, but ensuring your victory means something bigger. It may not have been the most dramatic revenge, but seeing her perfect world crumble while I moved on with my life was more than enough for me. And that's it. After everything that happened, I'm fine. Actually, I'm better. Now I know that my value doesn't depend on what others think of me, and that I will never allow anyone, no matter how close they are, to try to take away from me what I built. Here's some advice for anyone reading this. Protect what is yours. No matter how much you love someone, make sure your boundaries are clear and unchangeable. If someone really loves you, they won't try to cross them.